Mike, you ready to begin?
Sounds good.
What?
Good evening, everybody.
Councilmember.
Thank you for coming to this meeting. Appreciate all the people showing up. I want to just thank Walter and Patrick and Jessica for showing up this evening. I was very impressed by these guys on a council, on a sustainability meeting that Karen introduced us to. I thought it would be worthwhile for these guys to do their presentation, give us some opinions about some other techniques, and that's why I asked them to come. So if we could do them the courtesy and let these guys start. Thank you.
You're on, guys.
All right. I'll go on.
Yeah. Support, however.
Hi, everyone. Walter Rodriguez-Meyer, Patrick Shearer.
Nice to meet you.
Patrick's environmental science background and engineer. I'm a landscape architect registered in the state of Florida and urban designer, mostly with a background on city infrastructure planning. I'm going to show about a half-hour slides of projects that are built and some that are being built in Southeast Florida. What we're presenting today is what a lot of Southeast Florida jurisdictions are doing is doing stormwater master plans and a lot of the gray infrastructure plans that are needed and are part of the future of Southeast Florida. And after they do those studies, we've been commissioned by a few jurisdictions to do a nature-based solution study, which is to make those gray infrastructure solutions more efficient and have a longer life. An example of this is in city of Miami. They completed the stormwater master plan, which included flood pumps, seawalls, and a lot of gray solutions. And after that, we joined a team that did a Southwest Streetscapes plan, which is to find nature-based solutions such as living streets, sponge parks, systems that can work uphill, even if it's only a foot or two uphill, to hold that water and reduce the runtime on those future flood pumps. So this is really a story about efficiency. My background, I'm half indigenous, so I'm Muisca is the First Nation, matriarchal-led tribe that went from Colombia to Costa Rica. So I'm half indigenous and the other half, Ashkenazi and German and American. But why do I point out that background is in the ethos of the firm, we look at the ancient ecology of a place. That is, what was the pre-settlement condition that can inform our governance decisions today. In addition to that ancient knowledge, we look at science and some of the evidence-based information that intersects and supports some of this ancient knowledge. In the case with one of the last unconquered tribes in the United States, the Miccosukee and Seminole, lived in this slide here is the tree islands of the Everglades. And the tree islands of the Everglades were largely home base for these communities. They had a fleet of canoes, and they would build up these islands with middens, oyster shells and conch shells, and they were a very porous soil. And that's a really important detail, the porous soil to remember. And they also were cool places to live in a river of grass. So out in the sun, it's going to be bright and hot. In these tree islands, it's cool, but most importantly, it's air conditioned. And you ask yourself, how was the air conditioned 1,000 years ago? Well, trees are living pumps, and they have this term called ET, evapotranspiration, that was known that within the canopy of the tree island was a cool bubble of cold air from aerosols from the trees. And essentially the trees were lowering the groundwater within the tree island, keeping it dry, and cooling the air around it. So you get the double benefit of lowering groundwater within the tree island and cooling the air around it. So the urban heat island plus the cooling. So that was the ancient knowledge. Then you fast forward to 2015. And the very first scientist that I found that intersected that ancient knowledge through evidence-based study was Dr. Leonard Cinto. In 2015 study, Dr. Leonard Cinto from FIU, Florida International University, constructed a tree island similar to these that was artificial, it was a new one, in order to measure how these trees, when they're planted new, how long it takes for them to soak up the groundwater. And interestingly, in the tree islands, despite being in a river of grass where the water and the groundwater is pretty static, except for the high groundwater season, the tree islands that he built put groundwater sensors. And these piezometers measured the groundwater levels over time. And this graph on the right is from Dr. Sinto's work. And if you notice the timing, he's measuring, from 2009, February 13th to March. So he's going over more or less a couple months. But a couple of things to notice. One is day to night, as the sun came up and the day got hotter, the trees were soaking up the groundwater, and they lowered it by about between an 1/8 inch per day and a 1/4 inch per day was the range. And that's interesting because the river grass, the water wasn't lowered. But within the geology, water, as we know, groundwater tends to mound up and have valleys. So groundwater is not static underground. It's very different than the ocean or a river. And that is an important metric, an important tool in the future of city making is to have evapotranspiration quantified. So the project I'm going to show you next took Dr. Sinto's work, which is a tree island in the Everglades. And the question we had as a firm was we were commissioned by the city of Coral Gables to redesign Miracle Mile in 2016, right after this study came out. We also redesigned Giralda Plaza, which is next to Miracle Mile. And in that project, they had $27 million for the mile and Giralda Plaza. And it was a once in generation opportunity to solve some fluvial flooding they had, meaning they had rainwater flooding that would flood the shops on those summer rains. It was kind of a soggy district. The elevation was like 7 or 8, which is high ground for Key Biscayne, but not that high. And so,
Craziness.
thank you.
I think the double mic.
Audio, way better.
I kept adjusting my hearing aid.
Yeah. Thank you. I can do a song and dance, like high quality. And so, the question was, how can a tree island in the Everglades inform the redesign of an entire district, of an entire street?
Step like a foot or two away.
You won't be in that background? Okay. Cool, thank you. And I don't have to show my back to the crowd. And Hurricane Irma tested this project 1 month after it opened. Irma flooded a lot of Southeast Florida and took weeks for towns to recover. But Miracle Mile stayed completely dry, and the New York Times wrote about the project because of the amount of business owners that were able to open the next day unscathed. But the key is, how do you build a tree island that can evapotranspirate groundwater and desaturate soil? Because in low-lying places, you need to make room to store that water, right? And in the middle of a place like Key Biscayne, you have a different groundwater scenario than you do at the edges. The edges have a salt wedge. In the middle, there's this phenomenon called the Geibin-Herzberg phenomenon, which is a freshwater lens of rainwater floating on top of salt. And freshwater is more buoyant than salt. And so sometimes some of the flooding might be in the middle of Key Biscayne instead of just the edges. It's counterintuitive, and that's that bubble of fresh water. But in the case with Miracle Mile, if you see this excavation, we excavated fairly deep, almost to groundwater, and backfilled with structural soil. Structural soil is a fancy word developed by Cornell University to simply describe what is uniform gravel. And what essentially the base of a tree island and the base of Miracle Mile is a big stone reservoir, to put it most simply. Structural soil is the same gravel that's uniform with a lot of void, 40% void, which is the number you use for your stormwater calculation. But it just has growing medium in it that encourages tree roots to grow under it. So the structural soil protects the tree roots from all the truck traffic, so it can handle the load. But it also allows the tree roots to connect to each other the way the forest did 1,000 years ago, and for the tree roots to access the groundwater and self-irrigate. If you just plant a tree in the conventional way, trees can't access that groundwater, so you have to irrigate and add fertilizer. But when you use city water, it's pH alkaline, which makes plants inefficient at uptaking the fertilizer that's there. So it's this like feedback loop, right? But if the plants can access that groundwater, they're happier, they're more robust, they're more anchored in hurricanes, so you get less disaster response recovery budgets, and they connect with each other and share nutrients, and they connect to the groundwater, and everyone's happy, right? So Now, the challenge with Coral Gables is big budget, $27 million. But if you're going to look at an entire city like the city of Miami, we can't have that cost per square foot for some of the domestic neighborhoods. So we have to look at other materials like porous paving from asphalt or concrete or other systems, because we can't all use the same stone with porous joints that we did in Miracle Mile. So the city of Miami commissioned us after the Stormwater Master Plan study to look at green infrastructure systems at scale, not a single bioswale, but a whole network of systems that can take what we did in Miracle Mile, have the same performance of it, but scale it with a more affordable cost per square foot. And the case with this, a lot of the planning, this is the city of Miami, and what we organize is not a watershed approach, but an ancient landscape approach. That is to understand that in the last round of sea level rise, we had ancient islands, and to organize this design around the islands and the watersheds between them. So in the case with Southwest Miami, Southwest Streetscapes, you see this as the outline of the scope of the project, but it touches on 3 ancient atolls. So really Miami's future is much like the Lower Keys, right? There were these islands with sloughs and creeks between them. And how do we make that more affordable is to look at more cost-efficient ways of doing things, but also understanding the way our budgets are organized for maintenance now kind of go against the current of what's been there for and what is still underground today. In the case with Southeast Florida, the goal was to reconnect the Everglades to Miami the way they used, Everglades to Key Biscayne the way they used to, through some of these street designs and park designs. And this is a photo from the 1920s on the upper right corner that shows one of these ancient sloughs that are now underground, under houses, and still flowing underground, but we put an urban fill of a few feet that's highly compacted, so we don't access that porous geology. But what the project led to is we only need to adapt about 1/3 of the city of Miami in the next 2 mortgage cycles, 60 years out, to buy time for investment in these systems over the next generations. And that was about 1,500 acres. And you see this in the gray areas. This is where you get the high concentration of water that came as a result of the Stormwater Master Plan study, as well as some of the hydrological flows uphill from that. And so if you work upstream and follow these ancient sloughs, we can leverage the old geology of the place to solve some of the problem. And it led to this kit of parts that is now being implemented in the city of Miami, which is blue streets and green streets. Green streets are for infiltration uphill. Blue streets are for infiltration and conveyance, to be able to move water through the porous road base. And this is what they look like in 3D, as a kit of parts for the city of Miami to use in private property to encourage buildings to hold water, meaning fences that are thickened as cisterns, blue roofs, and then in the public realm to have yard easements that become front yard sponges that support the right-of-way as a contiguous living system. We also are working with the South Florida Waters Management District, redesigning canals. This piece of the project was BRIC funded from FEMA, which that program just got canceled, but we're continuing on with Wes Brooks from the Chief Resiliency Officer from the state. But it's looking at, when you treat asymmetrical alignments on a canal, how do you get more water quality and water quality improvements within the maintenance regime of the canal. So this is working with Catalina from the Canal District, from the Water Management District, and David Colangelo. And this is what that drawing is set up for. You see the neighborhood to the left, secondary canals that can hold a lot of that water, treat it, and then the maintenance zones of the canals become infiltration zones. And when there's a heavy rain event, it discharges directly in the canal. So you get a sustainability mode for water quality, cleaning water, and you get a resiliency mode for extreme rain events that are all about conveyance. And this is what those boardwalks look like through the new South Florida Water Management District open spaces that are now also sponges. We're also working with the county, with resiliency, open space and public works, Mayor Cava's office, along with the district. And the prime on this grant is with Miami Waterkeeper, funded by the EPA. This is looking at that island approach. This is one of the ancient islands. This is downtown Miami. And interestingly, those sloughs still exist, even though there's streets and there's Overtown and Liberty City. Interestingly, they all converge and follow North Miami Avenue and then discharge into the Little River Canal. And at the base of that discharge point, that pour point, there's this existing Larchmont Park that's been overlooked by the county for a long time. It hasn't been studied since the 1970s. Turns out to be the most important park in this watershed because it's at the bottom of the watershed just before it pours into the canal. And we're working with Patrick on this project, who ran the stormwater numbers, both working with the groundwater up through the geology and also working with the discharge. And without engineers like Patrick, we can't do this kind of work. But most importantly is, the recreation park becomes an island surrounded by this green infrastructure. And about a third of the park, between a third and a half of the park, was converted as a big sponge. And the remainder is put aside as solar sheds that can power the park and create backup power for the existing flood pumps that exist on the site, as well as providing shade for all the ball courts so people don't get sunburned and get hot. The flood pumps they're flanked on both sides of the project. They're on district land, but they're built by the county. And this is what it looks like in 3D. We can hold 1 million gallons of rainwater in this park. Plus we have a blue street network uphill from it. You see those blue strips going upstream. And another 1 million gallons in the blue streets. So that's 2 million gallons of load every time it rains, taken off the flood pumps, which reduces about an hour of runtime from those adjacent flood pumps. They're smaller 10,000 GPM flood pumps. But it starts to add up because if every time it rains, those pumps don't have to run for an hour, that gives you life on those flood pumps. And now you're starting to see the relationship between the living infrastructure and the gray infrastructure. They work together to solve the problem. And this is a detail of one of the networked swales going in and the recreation to the right. It's an active recreation zone. And these are not pie in the sky designs. We built these not only in Miracle Mile, but also in low-lying areas. Here's a sponge park that is 2 kilometers long in Puerto Rico on the west coast in Mayagüez. In this project, we had civil infrastructure, stormwater pipes discharging in the bay. You expect the Caribbean to be turquoise, clear water, but because of the discharge, it was polluted. We had a $55 million budget working with the governor of Puerto Rico and the mayor of Mayagüez. And on the upper left corner, you see those stormwater pipes flow straight into the bay. And the bottom left corner is the proposed strategy, which was built in 2007. And we learned by looking at the ancient pre-Columbian river systems in the Caribbean and how they, nearby the city, the rivers went parallel to the beach. They didn't go directly in the way the pipes are. And that allowed green infrastructure that exists in nature to pull nutrients out, cool down the river before it hits the reef. And most importantly, there's a sand dune between, a sand system between the river and the ocean that filtered a lot of the pollutants. The image on the left is before construction. You can see the bay. This is an aerial photo taken. There was opaque water, right? A lot of discharge from the city. But the photo on the right is after the grow-in period of the green infrastructure was complete, meaning by year 3, the system is complete, all the roots are connected, and it's able to polish the water. And this is not a rendering, it's a straight photograph. If you can't see the cursor, but on the upper right corner, that stormwater pipe now flows into a primary treatment wetland, and then a secondary wetland, and finally polishing through a sand dune. And this is what those systems look like, right? You get the hard infrastructure seawall that is expected in a typical Army Corps project, and then you get the living infrastructure wetland system. I'm going to stop for a second here and jump to what other cities are doing for a few minutes. I'm going to show you a lot of this knowledge, while it goes back to the indigenous knowledge, also the Romans built incredible streets. And the Roman roads, I'm going to pull up that Roman road for a second. The Roman roads that were built a couple thousand years ago are still, well, they're not used today, they're functioning. One second. I'll go back to the Roman road in a second. But this is Provincetown, Massachusetts. So interestingly, in Provincetown, it's very low and coastal, much like Key Biscayne. And so if someone tells you living streets, porous paving doesn't work in coastal zone, intertidal zones, this is a built city that is like just a couple feet above high tide. And you can see that photograph on the left, you see the bay. And what they created like 15 years ago was a zero impervious ordinance for the city. They're just going to say no more porous, no more impervious streets. And interestingly, Provincetown started to create this porous asphalt that does a few things. They have a lot of old buildings, historic buildings that are low lying. And in the cross section, they had a unique design that had a slight slope on the subdrain down to the center. So they essentially were dewatering a lot of the ancient buildings around them in the design of the streetscape with that porous system. And if you look at that slot at the bottom, it was connected to the groundwater. So they had some groundwater management going on in that cross section design. So that's the case of Provincetown. The other case is in Lake George, New York. They have a highway. So there's a specification for porous highways in New York State with the DOT. And this highway was built on State Road 6. It's a 4-lane highway. And this is the case of heavy duty porous paving specification. Yes, it costs more. You now have 9 inches of porous paving in the cross section of the asphalt. But this was built 15 years ago, and I asked the public works director from Warren County who commissioned this. I said, "How is this highway doing compared to other conventional highways?" And he said, interestingly enough, and I have this in writing, I can share this testimony with you from the public works director. He said this highway, of the porous highway, has outlasted the conventional highway that was built at the same time. The conventional highway is already failing, but this heavy duty specification of a thick base of porous asphalt has handled all the truck traffic and all the things you expect on a highway, an American highway. And yet it's also, if you look at the thickness of the base, that stone reservoir, you're getting all that storage as well. So every single street, every single plaza, every single parking lot is open. And what's really exciting about Southeast Florida is you lead the country right now on porous paving. What I mean is the mayor of Miami-Dade County has passed an ordinance to require porous paving in certain scenarios. And that's very exciting. That's making my job easier in other jurisdictions where I'm like, guys, just make it the law. They're doing it in Miami-Dade County. So you guys are very advanced here. And it's an exciting time to have these conversations about, once you do a stormwater study or once you do the gray infrastructure study, what else can you do and work uphill? You can do it incrementally in pieces with pilot projects. So I'm gonna pass it to Patrick for a second and then chat for a bit about your experiences.
Thank you, Walter. I think you covered everything I want to say. No, but yeah, no, this is a great graphic. And I think Walter's stories and testimonies it can be done a lot of places. Can it be done everywhere? Not exactly. But with engineering, it can definitely be done here. And I drove around the neighborhood on my way in, just looking at the residences and the situation that you have at hand, because I was a resident in Miami Beach when they did their road raising program, and there was a lot of pushback because what happens is when you raise a road, it displaces that runoff to yards, and that's with day-to-day runoff and everything. That's not just pump stations or not. So really, with a porous design, you reduce the risk of that harmonization issue, I would say, and really you're putting the daily storms, you're keeping them out of people's yards, and you're keeping them off the road, really. The ponding is going to go down. And that's what a lot of people also don't understand about roadway design. Roadways are actually sized to convey the storm at a certain size or a certain size storm. So either the 10-year storm or the 25 or the 100-year storm is actually going to be flowing down the road. And it's either going to affect your cars or you don't want it to affect your house. So they design the roads so 100-year storms don't come in your house. And just like that with porous pavement, we can do the exact same thing. And I'm engineer of record currently for 2 City of Miami sea level rise adaptation projects at parks. They're at Jose Marti Park and Margaret Pace Park. And Jose Marti Park is 100% design permitted. We actually got our DERM permit on the first submittal for using porous pavement, and we raised the river walk from like 1.8 elevation to 4.5 and 4. And so that's really what we sort of suggest is raising a little bit higher and making it porous and making the roadway so it captures all that runoff and it doesn't go to the private residential yards. And that's really what our design concept would be to explore with the team that's already designed fully the roadways is how could we do that type of a situation here? Because I think the current plan is only raising maybe a couple inches, 6 inches, 8, even a foot, but really that raising part, 40% of the storage can be porous, and we can keep that storage in the roadway either until the tide goes down or until the injection wells can handle it or until it can infiltrate just to the groundwater table. So there's actually a couple different ways it could be designed, and looking at cost and you really got to work with the lay of the land with every city and every site, and to keep the cost low, you really got to work with the full engineering team to see how do we work with the structures that are already in place and build upon that and really enhance the system. So that's really how we sort of think of things. All of my projects are retrofit projects. I've never gotten a new development project where I can go in, clear everything and fix it all the first time. I'm always fixing problems from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, everything that's currently sort of causing a lot of these flooding issues that were just built without the thoughts of what's going on today, plus the rising sea levels and just the intense rainstorms and really, I would say, overdevelopment in Miami. But really what's happened is we've capped off a lot of that surface, so the water can't go back into one of the most porous aquifers in the world is the Biscayne Aquifer, and it has Miami oolite, which is limestone that's sort of like Swiss cheese once you get past the capstone. But that capstone is sort of impenetrable in a lot of places, especially where we paved over it. So that's sort of what we do to work with that aquifer. And we're sort of restoring an above ground layer of the aquifer and building upon it in stages as cities can afford, because you can't afford the whole 2100 build out for 6 feet of sea level rise or whatever. And we have to build in layers and ways that it can be incrementally built as the water levels go up and sort of check against the data using science. And that's what we have to do is check against that data. How much time can we buy in each increment of road? And we're doing that with seawalls along the coast. The seawall codes locally and everywhere have sort of been changed mostly to 6-foot NAVD, and you have to build projects so they're able to be adapted to 8-foot NAVD along the bay so that during the next phase of flooding, they won't have to go get permits and all that. It's already in the construction plans. We just go build that next layer of the project. So that's how we're designing a lot of adaptation projects. And really with that, I would sort of leave it maybe open to questions. Yeah, I think Q&A is really.
Entertain some questions.
Yeah.
I know we have community members, we have experts. And I will mention, we're both working with a lot of the engineers that are working in Key Biscayne as sub-consultants. I was mentioned Black and Beach, we're teamed with them on federal work. We have former Army Corps commanders that work in my firm that are federal works directors. The former New York District Commander, Colonel Tom Asbury, worked for us, and now we went to Dewberry. But we have this like rotation of Army Corps folks and FEMA and Fed folks that come into our firm. Why? Because we want to show how the payback on this, the ROI on these things, by using the community rating systems and having an impact approach. what we're looking for is not like a big master plan again. We're actually want to work from the inside out and do pilots. And the most important thing is not only science led, how we started the conversation, but end with science with monitoring and maintenance of these systems by putting in sensors so we can know in real time how they're performing, so that there's proof in the pudding. So every time it rains, you can check the website and everyone can see the data. Say it rained this heavy, the groundwater was here, went up to here, and the system evapotranspirated over a month and lowered it for the next rain event, things like that. So we want to have that real-time data so that decisions are being informed by new science, new knowledge, or old formulas used in novel ways. So we'll leave it there for Q&A. Any questions on
Question
things?
for you. The mentioned about harmonization. When you drove around and keep this game, it's what we call the Mackle houses, and the yards are very low. Are you saying, if I understand you correctly, that we could be able to raise the paving in the street by using the structural paving,
Yeah.
structural asphalt, et
He
cetera?
can talk about one that he's building in the Everglades right now.
So
where he can
no,
manage
but
all the water.
let me
within the right
continue.
of way.
So the elevation of that paving could be equal or higher than the street, than the lot itself, not flood the lot?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's one of the main things that I really wanted to get to today is that is the goal, to be able to do that and to create the capacity within that roadway right of way to take on that design storm. And you're going to have to work with, obviously there's been a lot of study and research done on water levels and all those things. And we want to build upon that, not reopen that can. But really, I think the roadway, I don't know if anybody could tell me the elevation that the plan is to raise, like Harbor Drive, for instance, or anything like that, around
We're
3.
just talking, no,
Either way, we can
it
go
doesn't really matter, just what I'm
above.
saying.
Yeah, if the yards are
Could
at
you be
certain
6 inches, a
elevation.
foot above what we have now?
Exactly.
Above
That's
the lots there. So my next question is, since it's much more expensive than normal paving, what's the life, and you mentioned how the life expectancy is greater with heavy traffic. We're not, on the side streets, we're not having heavy traffic. Are we looking at a multiple of twice before you repave? Or are you just talking about the binder course? You're talking about the wearing course? What are we talking about repaving? In other words, the base structural, whatever you call it, fill, for lack of a
right. The
better word,
subgrade.
that
Right.
stays there no matter what. So we're only talking about the binder course, the asphalt, being CBC or FABC, different from this particular type of stuff.
Well, what's
Porous stuff.
to do the living street? You've got to be able to change
The
subgrade.
underground
Sorry?
part. The underground part actually would have to be excavated out and replaced with a rock aggregate reservoir
I'm saying you do
that
all that.
holds the
But
reservoir.
all
Yeah.
I'm saying is that you have a wearing course, okay, FABC, whatever you call it. And how does that compare to regular FABC?
Like
fine asphalt,
durability.
same as concrete. How
Right.
does it compare one to the other?
Yeah, so conventional road design and conventional roads in Southeast Florida, when they're in the intertidal zone, right? So when the flood king tides come, there's this phenomenon they use to describe it. It's called alligatoring. It's when the asphalt fails prematurely. It looks like alligator skin. What's going on there is you have an impervious subgrade and an impervious road, right? And when the groundwater rises, it creates hydrostatic pressure. And when that groundwater rises up, it squirts all the fines out of the subgrade, which causes premature failure of the asphalt road. And even when you repave it, you do a new pavement, 3-5 years later, you're paving again, it will prematurely collapse again because the subgrade, the fines are being washed out. What's great about the living street design is there's uniform gravel. There's no fines to be washed out. They're stable in intertidal zone, and thus they last longer than conventional road design in the intertidal zone.
So again, you didn't answer my question.
On top of that, the
Well, my question
surface.
is real simple.
Right.
If I have to repave streets every 5 years with an FABC, when I'm using your pervious asphalt, how often do I repave streets?
So there's actually a couple different types of pervious surfaces. There's porous asphalt, porous concrete, and then there's block pavers. And we actually use heavy duty 1 foot by 1 foot square block pavers that have a lot of drainage capabilities. They drain 1,000 inches per hour compared to the porous asphalt, which can be like 5 inches per hour. So those don't have to be repaved. We actually use the super heavy duty kind that have a very reduced amount of cracking. And so those, if we had to raise to the next level, raise another foot, let's say we start off with 1 foot above the yards so that we don't have a lot of harmonization issues. But when the next sea level rise phase comes in and we got to go the next foot, we would just take up those pavers, stack them, store them, replace the subgrade with that 40% void aggregate reservoir, and then put the pavers back down. Or if you're using porous asphalt, and there are ways to do it down here, you can do similar ways with maintenance. But the binding and stuff, I can't speak to the porous asphalt as much, but Walter may know from New Hampshire and some other states have really innovated.
I mean,
So that's great. What's the multiple of
Yeah.
price? Now we're talking about how long it wears. You've mentioned block, porous concrete floors, asphalt. What are we looking at compared to conventional paving, conventional streets? As a multiple.
The performance difference is the thing. So like you mentioned, the cost for the surface part
Yeah.
is a little more expensive, but that's because you're getting instead of having a stormwater pond offsite to treat all your runoff, you're doing it straight in the right of way and you're saving your land space,
I
and you don't
understand
have
all that.
land space to do it. So
Go
yeah,
back to my question.
yeah, back to your question.
How
Sorry.
much? Is it double?
Right.
Is it single? Is it
Yeah.
1.5 times, 4 times, 5 times? I mean, is it some
When you
number that we'll look at and say, wow, well, like right now we got a thing, great pumps
When-
to pump water out, but those pumps are $22 million.
When you consolidate the performance issues, you can make it equal or better performance. And Walter's brought this up before. If you look at gallon per gallon efficiency,
Yeah.
the efficiency is actually higher. But cost wise, we can play with the design, and that's where different ones surfaces cost different things. But you can make it equal to the project design today, or possibly cost savings, obviously, you know. But
I'm not
that's
gonna give you
I
an
know.
answer.
I'll
Thank
give
you.
you, I'll give you order of magnitude because, you know, I get like Miracle Mile, Coral Gables, Draw the Plaza is nearly $50 a square foot. We had stone, really high-end stuff, right? But when we did that study with City of Miami and now with Miami-Dade County, it was how do we use porous paving in South Florida numbers? And it's somewhere around $20 a square foot is the final number. Now I know if you were to do a new street from scratch, it's gonna be a little less than that, but it's not gonna have the high performance values of a porous living street. You're not gonna get evapotranspiration. You're not gonna get the decentralized stormwater management. And you can have a reduction in your pipe sizes and all that other stuff, reduction on your pumps downstream, all those things. So those are the rough order, you know, it's based between 20 and 50 a square foot based on how high end the finishes are. You know, you want high end porphyry stone, like Draw the Plaza, you know, you're 50. If you just want porous asphalt on a domestic road, not a heavy highway, you're gonna be close to 20 a square foot.
And that would include the underlayment all the way down.
Yeah, that's full excavation down to the groundwater and then backfilling with structural soil and then paving. And again, the tree roots will grow under the roadbed and help lower that groundwater.
Hey, Chris, what are we paying per square foot for regular paving if you had to start all over again?
To build and resurface?
No, new sub base,
Resurface
new
and
base.
then-
New subbase?
It's above, yeah, the whole thing.
It's about, we're about $14 to $15.
Okay, good.
Close.
Good enough, thank you.
Oh.
That's
Purport, you got
okay,
order of magnitude to work with.
Good.
Yeah.
And what are you looking at? Just basically taking the asphalt off and using the base? What are we talking about a square foot?
Just the asphalt, mill and pave.
Yeah, mill and pave.
It's somewhere around $6 a square foot.
Okay, thank you. Okay,
Square.
square yard. They're talking square feet. Okay. All right, I got you. So
Yeah.
you're talking base 50. Excuse me.
I mean, what we're saying is the sub base is even if you didn't do a porous street, at least get your reservoir course
No, I didn't
of
listen,
uniform.
I'm
It does a lot. You know?
It sounds great. I'm just
Yeah.
trying to see, we don't
Yeah.
want to spend a fortune. We don't have to, but we want to do it efficiently and right. And if it makes a lot of sense, fine, but we want some idea what we're talking about. Not we're going to go buy diamonds and platinum to put in streets. That's all.
Yeah, yeah. I
Ask
also
you a
encourage
question.
everyone, if you want to see one of these projects tomorrow at noon, you can RSVP with
Mhm.
Miami Waterkeeper. I'm giving a walking tour of Giralda Plaza in Miracle Mile from noon to 2 tomorrow. So if you go to miamiwaterkeeper.org to their website and RSVP tonight, you you can see some of these slides, but also we're walking through the project and learning really what to do and what not to do, because the project was value engineered without design thinking. And I'll show you what I call the metrics of imperfection, the things not to repeat. So we're proud of our mistakes. We'd like to share them so others can learn. So.
Yeah, you get some questions.
I have a question. From a runoff standpoint, South Florida gets hit with very short, very intense rainfall events. So what's the absorption capacity versus the intensity capacity of rainfall? Are you suggesting by this design that you'll be able to increase the time of concentration?
Yeah, you want to talk to that, but
Yeah.
and I'll talk about how the peak shaving.
Right. Absolutely. It would increase the time of concentration and
How
let the-
so? I mean,
Right.
I'm sorry. I mean, it was kind of
No,
a
you're
loaded
fine.
question because I'm very, I have an issue with, I don't, I mean, I love pervious pavement, but where there's a low groundwater, high groundwater. I mean, in
Absolutely.
high condition like this,
Yep.
when you get hit with a rainfall event,
Right. And it's always going
explain to me
right.
how you're going to absorb that.
Right. So each site elevation is going to be different, but assuming you can go 2 feet above the water table for high tide for Key Biscayne, it's about 0 NAVD 88. So for your neighborhoods that are 2 or 3 feet, if we're raising it a foot, we're going to be gaining some head, and that surface actually can take on 1,000 inches per hour. And once it gets clogged, it's still 500 inches per hour. So that the surface becomes not the issue, and then you want to get the water off the surface to that underground reservoir. And depending how much we increase it, if we do 2 feet, the actual pavers are 6 inches high. So you got 1.5 feet of reservoir under there, 40% voids. That's actually 7 inches of storage. So that's your 10-year
I understand
storm.
the storage.
Right,
It's
right.
just the capacity to think of it as a bathtub.
And
Think
it
of it as
slows
having
it
a drain
down.
like this, and
Right.
I'm pouring it with a fire hose.
Right.
How are you going to drain the bathtub in real time?
Right. So the ground and the gravity is going to do that over time, either as the tide goes down, whether it's a tidal event that you're dealing with, or that's typically
Well,
what's going on.
what that triggers to me is that it's not going to collect it. It's going to end up in the catch basins, and it's not going to create a significant impact on the pipe sizes, which
It
is
goes
what's
straight.
caused.
It's going to go straight to the aggregate reservoir and sit there until it percolates down into the groundwater table, and it's not going to go to the catch basins. Actually, is how it would work. Yeah.
Okay, how do you overcome the capillary effect of the groundwater coming up high when you have a high tide condition at the same time that you're having a high rainfall event?
Right. And that's where really the higher you raise the road, the better the
So
head.
it's a condition of, so
you're
what you're
getting.
saying is that this works, but under the condition that we raise the roads high enough.
To create an above ground storage area within your right of way. Absolutely. You're
To
creating a
trigger-
retention
to trigger
area.
enough of a head that the groundwater, that the rainfall will overcome, I'm sorry, that the absorption will overcome the rainfall intensity and end up in your aquifer. That's
It's really to buy you time. That additional head gives you additional storage.
right. But I think if
Yeah.
we're going to invest money, if we're going to invest $40, I don't know what it was, I think we need to have some, well, we need to have some real-time demonstrations. I mean, I'm all for a pilot analysis and figuring it out, because this debate has been going on for quite a while about pervious and impervious in South Florida. I also have another question about water quality. I don't doubt at all that this does help water quality, but I'm concerned that through time, the voids do become filled, and, through oils and grease and small debris.
Right.
So how do you maintain that? I know you're
Right.
pumping out in here, but
Right. So a big part of it is, like Walter said, we wash the underground stone rock that's used. It's
Mhm.
washed of all the fines. So it creates that 40% voids, because the rocks are all the same size and they have voids around them. So that's what makes it longer to take up. But the surface is what's maintained, so that that doesn't go down into the deeper reservoir. And you could just vac truck it after a storm, either quarterly, every 6 months, or annually, depending on the buildup of those roads. And the maintenance is key, but that keeps it from getting down into that reservoir, so it's easily maintained at the surface.
There's a policy overlay there that picks up from where the engineers build on the capital to the maintenance side, which is The street sweepers on a porous paving street, they have to turn off the sweeper and only use the vacuum. And so that just becomes a policy thing. So you have to collaborate with sanitation to make sure the policy's in place. Because if you're gonna build gray infrastructure, you're gonna have expected to maintain it. The same thing with living
And that's
infrastructure.
kind of my next,
It's
my
got,
next
it has a
question.
maintenance regime, but it's way less per gallon over the cost of the
But
system.
it does have a
than gray
maintenance
infrastructure.
component that
There's no such thing as
otherwise,
no maintenance on gray infrastructure
Well,
or living infrastructure. you
mm,
know?
okay, but there is a certain added maintenance to maintain those voids in that porous pavement.
Yeah, not a
open.
big deal.
To get good
Like,
performance, yes.
Okay.
And if you're finding that the percolation is slowed, some of the technologies we discussed, you can swap them out. There's ways to rehab it. They're not that expensive.
Oh, so how would you restore percolation?
So if it's not percolating, there's the vac trucks and then there's
Mhm.
wash systems. And the reason we brought Jessica, you raise your hand. Oh, she's online, sorry. She was gonna be here today, is she's a vendor for multiple of these systems. And she had, one of the vendors she has is for rehabbing the porous paving if it's neglected and not maintained properly, right? So just the same hat you put on for the pump and the pipe in terms of maintenance per gallon, budgets and policy, you do the same for living infrastructure. You just can't neglect it.
And so also for the porous blocks that I was describing, once you get like a Hurricane Irma event where if the street was at 3.5 or 4 and the water table rises above that, and when the water goes up through the cracks, it washes the sand and the wood chips and whatever debris is collected in it. And it's very easy to maintain after that storm. So it's sort of self-cleaning, and the blocks are heavy enough where they stay in place and they don't do any of the buckling like tree roots with asphalt and sidewalks that you see. That's actually a trick of porous pavement design. It allows the tree roots to grow through those voids so you don't get any buckling. And that's where the way a lot of, actually Broward County has a special design thing they call a rock burrito. And it's basically just like that they design under their sidewalks so that the tree roots don't buckle them. And it's a porous pavement cross section basically.
Okay,
But-
so one final question. Where is this being applied right now in Miami-Dade County?
We're doing it for city of Miami. I've seen actually porous pavement in a lot of low-lying places where I've watched it a lot to see how it performs, like South Beach, the parking lot right by what used to be Nikki Beach.
Yeah,
And at 3rd
I'm
Street,
aware
I
of that.
surf right there, and there's a porous asphalt parking lot there. It's porous asphalt, I'm pretty sure, and I've watched it, and it's actually performed well during storms, and I bet it's at elevation 3, and I'm doing it at 4.5 in city of Miami, and we have street pilots in Miami-Dade for the EPA and other ones. But we've done it in Melbourne, Florida. We did it in the art district there with these paved drain blocks, and we made them artistic.
But have you done an entire right-of-way system?
Yeah, actually, there has been ones, not by me, but others in Melbourne, in Fort Myers. They actually did the center lane
Mhm.
of US 1. And after a hurricane that cleared Fort Myers 2 years ago, whatever the name of that one was, the porous asphalt or the paved drain was doing great. And it just needed to be sand vacked, but it wasn't any of the drainage issues. So, but there's a lot of good examples of it around. FDOT has piloted a lot of places, but we could give you a lot of location examples. And the underground reconstruction is the main thing that has to happen to make it work, and the maintenance. And if you don't do those two things, yes, it's not going to be the good system for you. And with Dade County's new impervious ordinance, they actually require, and with the new state stormwater law, they require a maintenance and operation plan for every stormwater permit you're ever going to get from now on. So we're baking this into our designs. Like for Jose Marti, we have the vac truck specs in there for how to vac the permeable pavement. We designed it so fire trucks can come down in the emergency and they're not going to crack the blocks. It's super heavy duty. And we've even worked with those vendors to try to get them to make these blocks out of the same kind of concrete that you would use on an airport runway, so they say that's too expensive, but we're pushing them. So, and we have 3D other printing vendors. So there's other ways we can innovate to get these cost savings, but that's where we just have to have a site to work with and sort of be pushed into a corner. And that's the way these things move forward. But yeah, good questions.
I'm good. Anybody else have questions in the audience?
I have one.
Go right ahead.
I'm still confused. you're gonna build this road up, right? So if you build it up, the basic manhole is almost level or even lower than some of the roadways here.
Mhm.
So now these people are gonna have to build a driveway to get up to the road. And wait a minute, my second question is, on the newer homes, you have to go up an elevation of 12 or 14 feet for insurance purposes. So now you've got a road this way and you've got a house this way, then you gotta, it's gonna catch water in between.
So there were in an adaptation scenario, there would be two types of porous road typologies. If you had a block with Mackle houses, you would have one that managed the bathtub effect. So the harmonization includes, check valves and things that can take water into the road from the yard to an extent. And then you'd have a different typology if you're in a new neighborhood with higher houses. So it just depends on where you're at. So
Yeah, but he was saying, no, the manhole, how are you gonna get, if it's elevated 10
Mhm.
feet?
Kissing
and your
pizza's good.
house is lower, then the people are responsible for building their driveways higher so they can get up to the.
So with the Mackle houses, what's been done in other jurisdictions, such as in New York City, what happens there is a roadbed will get elevated just a foot, not much, because there's low-lying houses that are lower than the road crown, just to buy time, and so that you got a way out that's dry. And they're paying for the upgrade of the driveways, so the residents don't have to pay for it. It's part of the plan, right? So you just need permission from the resident to upgrade their driveway. It's also porous and meets grade, but so you have a program for the Mackle homes that's different than the rest, right? Because they're existing and they're low lying. And when over time, when the Mackle homes, if they get replaced and bigger homes come, then you bring in the second typology, which is a roadbed that goes higher and is able to meet all the other systems. So.
In here, we have 3 Michael homes, 2 elevator homes, another Michael home. So how you gonna work that out?
You would, like I said, adapt. Phase one, you maybe raise it a foot, 18 inches, and not 3 feet. And then once that street is complete over time and it's all new homes, then you come up with a new phase of construction and add on to it. So it's adaptable. That's what adaptation is.
Any other questions? Karen?
In one of your presentations, I heard you talk about cost of ownership and how these types of solutions with the grade actually are much more favorable as far as cost of ownership goes. Can you talk about that, please?
Yeah.
That was very interesting.
Yeah, that's, New York City introduced living systems almost more than a decade ago. And it was the same debate you're having now, New York City had a decade ago. And it was the same thing. It was like, what do we do? Or there was a lot of gray infrastructure expertise, but not a lot of green infrastructure expertise. So finally, someone said, stop talking about gray versus green. Talk about one type of green, which is money. They said, what is the cost per gallon over 30 or 50 years of life to manage this water? And they went back and ran the numbers, and it came back to be 3 to 4 times cheaper to do the natural infrastructure than to do the gray. And what they figured out is you can delay the expenditure a little more on the gray. You still need it, but maybe you don't need it so big, so fast. And so they just slowed it down, smaller systems, and work uphill and absorb as much as you can uphill, even if it's a foot uphill, and then buy time to see where the sea level rise curves are heading and to make that decision. So it allows, it's a phased approach, right? And that's what a lot of cities in Europe are doing as well. Like the Thames Gate in London, they have a big plan, but they're not making the big decisions until the curves are becoming more accurate as the science of sea level rise is becoming more improved each decade. But they are doing things upstream and doing smaller things in the meantime, quickly, including gray infrastructure, including flood pumps. But instead of a million-gallon pump per minute, they're doing 10,000 GPM pumps and smaller ones all around, right? So that it's that phase approach and having more tools in your toolbox than just like a heavy wrench, right? So.
Any other questions from anybody? Michael, you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Any questions?
Nope, I've heard this presentation before. That's why I wanted to bring everybody in. I was highly impressed by these guys, and I think that
They're very impressive.
number 3C is it could be a possible pilot project for these gentlemen to look at alternatively on the flood mitigation around the school. So just throwing it out there.
Anything else, or are we done?
I think we're done. And if anybody wants to see one built, like I said, tomorrow at noon, meet me at Giralda Plaza.
Thank you both so very much for
Thank
coming.
you very
Really
much for coming, guys.
appreciate the presentation, and I guarantee we will consider it in our overall plans. Not guarantee we'll use it, definitely guarantee. If it makes any sense, we'll definitely consider it. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Nice job on the Everglades. Figure that one out. That was.
Yeah, I encourage you to talk to Dr. Leonard Cinto, PhD. He's the director at FIU.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a designer. He's an engineer and a scientist. Dr. Cinto's an academic scientist. He's in research. He's got his guys in the field. Let him talk about this. He may have a different view than I will, but you know, you have ancient creeks that run through Key Biscayne, and they're functioning today. They're just a few feet below. So your question about how do you get water out? Well, gravity as much as possible. And we don't have gravity, then you're bringing the pumps in. So pumps are part of the future. But if you can leverage those existing subsurface hydrological flows, the water is not static. You know, it doesn't. The whole island doesn't just lift. It's some areas are higher than others.
You may have just brought an innovative solution that feeds on our past.
Exactly. Yeah. And what's unique about South Florida is Fairchild, you know, who helped settle South Florida. He had some of the first aerial photography in the world of cities. And so most cities got aerial photography in the 1920s, late 20s, and early 30s. Here in Miami, we have some of the first aerial photographs, and they're in the early 20s. And so Fairchild had a company, and he did a grid over Miami. So he has a beautiful 1920s documentation of our habitats before it was developed. I use that on all of our projects to say, here's what was here before you built. Notice the change in vegetation. Here's a wetland strip cutting through South Beach. Here's a wetland strip cutting through Key Biscayne. Let's find that old strip and resurrect it, right? It doesn't mean you're going to daylight a creek that used to be there, but you can leverage its function. You know that groundwater is still moving through there, and it's a way of dewatering the way it used to, right?
Working with the natural systems eons ago.
You got it.
I look, I'm prone to, I like working with natural systems. I don't like affecting anything that is already or intruding into what was developed naturally. The question is, we're subject to a different challenge right now. And can we work with the previous systems?
Yeah.
And, you know, age-old, eons-old systems, can we work with that? And can we make them work for our benefit? I agree. I mean, I'm open to it.
Yeah, and Steve and I met when he was at City of Miami in Public Works, and when he first started working here, we chatted about this, and it was when you were hiring Black and Beach, and he said, let's talk once we finish the gray infrastructure plan, because it makes sense to do that. And I think now it's a good time to come circle back and see where we can bring in some pilots. So good time. Yeah.
Thanks again. Michael.
Yep. Ed, I just wanted
You're on.
the part that I found most interesting was the subsurface natural water movements, and if we could somehow tie into those movements, I thought that made a huge amount of sense. That's why that was what got me intrigued, having a geology background. So since we finished that, Steve, we should start talking about the scopes of work. It's tab 1, 3A. I got a couple comments
Why do we
on
want to do tab 1?
How do you want to, Ed, do you have something you want to do first?
Well, why do we want to do it at all? Haven't we done it enough? Why do we want to reinvent the wheel again?
I don't think we're reinventing the wheel here. I think we're going to just confirm some of the information that we discussed to the base numbers. So the first one is actually trying to get someone basically getting those numbers rerun. Now I have a couple questions, Steve. You wrote on the top page 2 of the tab 1. You put in there for 2050, and the other projects are 2040. I was just wondering why you chose to do that.
So the 2050 is what we discussed at the last committee meeting that we would do as the baseline assessment. The 2040 is the one that when we were looking at the EAC report, EAC looked at that, did their report in 2015 with a 15-year horizon. So therefore it would have been 2030. You asked us to move it forward to 2025, 15 years forward would be 2040.
Right, so.
But to be consistent,
We're gonna,
do we go
we're
to
gonna compare,
2040 or 2050?
and the idea was if we're gonna compare these two tasks, because we're basically sort of taking the EIC approach, potentially rerunning those numbers with the 2040. I thought it made sense to take the current situation that we have with the ACOM design and run those at 2040 so we can compare and contrast the two.
I don't have it in front of me, Mike, but I think looking at the intermediate or the intermediate low, the difference between 240 and 250 wasn't very much. I think the major thing came when we went to 2060. Is that correct, Steve? Do you have the numbers there between the two? I think they're pretty close together until you pass 2050, aren't they?
Oh, there is somewhat of an inflection point between 2040 and 2050.
Yeah, there. If I remember looking at
Not an
the chart.
acceleration, but it does inflect.
But pretty close, aren't they? Between the two?
Let's see, NOAA intermediate, looking at 4 or 5 inches.
No. Mike, Steve says about 4 or 5 inches between the two, between that 2040, 2050. So if our plan, if that's a slight difference, and I don't think it's gonna make that much difference, I would say, fine, go to 2050. Because then people say, hey, you're only gonna have 10 years, because by the time you get this thing done, it's gonna be 2030. So this way you're gonna have 22 years if you go to 2050. So your life cycle cost of the project is more reasonable.
That's fine. That's fine. If
So how do you feel about
if we go to 2050, I'm fine with that. But we should do the EIC report to the same data points so we can.
Yeah, I'm saying consistent to all. If you're gonna do everything to 2050. That's all.
All right, that's fine. Yeah, agreed in there. Also, Steve, just for purpose of conversation, you put a level of service number here. I thought the goal was to run these parameters to get the level of service.
Right.
Where are you referring to?
Page 2, the bottom of up to, you made a
Okay,
list
I see
here.
where you are.
Yeah.
Okay, I see where you are.
I mean, the idea I thought was to get the minimum code requirements that would be required to get a permit through Dade County and Durham, with the minimum requirements from the state, and therefore generate the amount of level of service that would provide.
Right, but in order to do the calculations, you got to understand what you're designing to.
Which
Otherwise, you can just run the numbers, and all you're doing is a new model.
I'm under the impression the county requires 6 inches, 24 hours for level of service. Then we would have another criteria, which would be 14 inches. We talked about no greater than 14 inches for emergency vehicles. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, for the fire truck, yes.
And then I think I was told the county is, or was I told the county was 6 inches, 24 hours, I think, right, over the ground road? So Mike, that's, I think, the minimum. So as long as we would exceed those two things, we see what, where we are, right?
Make sure you're being clear, though. The county is the crown of road. We're talking here the low crown of road.
But 6 inches, but I don't know if it's lower.
Over the crown of road.
Otherwise, I just was told it was 6 inches. Again, with the 5-year, forget the 7 inches in 24 hours, but 5 years and 25 years. I mean, not 5 years and 20. Excuse me. I'm sorry.
Okay, so just to be, I'm just trying.
3 days and 72 hours in 5 years. which is the county supposedly.
72 hours.
It's 72 hours, 5 years. Instead of this 24.
You're talking the design storm.
Yeah.
Storm
That's what I'm talking
intensity.
No, the design storm for the county is the 10-year storm.
I was told it's 5 years and,
For local roads, maybe, but I think that they increase it. Yeah.
5 years, 24-hour event.
Right.
No, 5 years, 72-hour event, not 24.
24 hours.
But
Okay, this is the guy who told me who did the master plan for Miami-Dade County. Okay, so maybe he's wrong.
So, Steve, I think the important thing is part of this conversation was to get the minimum requirements so we can.
Same way we
back
did
them up.
AAC, in the same way he worked for ACON at the beginning on the plan we have.
And correspondingly, we should run the same study, do the EAC study with the same exact parameters.
Agreed.
And then tab 3, the spot flood reduction plan. I mean, I think this, I don't really have a lot of comments on here. This looked fine to me. As long as the parameters are the same. Which you have the design parameter of 12 feet over the crown of road, 12 inches over the crown of road.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, but I'm sorry, I'm a little confused here. Please enlighten me. Are we trying to redefine the level of service?
Yeah,
Under what theory?
and the theory we're commissioned by the full council to see if we come back with a project that's acceptable at a much lower price.
I understand the component of the price, but I think that we're getting into engineering theory, and that is not something that we have the, as a body, the technical capacity of the body to dictate engineering theory. That is up to the engineers, and that's up to common practice, and it's up to what is accepted by the county. I hate to steer away from that, developing with, lay people in this board, as a board as a whole, individually, it doesn't matter, that we are dictating engineering theory. Okay, I'm not an attorney, I don't dictate legal theory. I'm not a policeman, I don't walk with a badge inside of a mall. We are not engineers, and I think we need to understand that for once and for all. We're gonna talk about cutting costs, let's talk about value engineering, the current design, not about reinventing the wheel in ways that we do not understand as a body.
Talking about meeting the county code, not re-engineering anything. If their code says 6 inches, 24 hours, okay? And we say it can't be more than 14 inches for a emergency vehicle, what is wrong with that?
Where is the study that supports that? Where can somebody in this board tell me, please, what are we using for backup? What are we using to sustain our ad hoc engineering theories?
We were told, and we discussed over and over with Eric at emergency vehicles, that we didn't want to have water on the streets higher than 14 inches because emergency vehicles would have a problem going through it. So that's where the 14 inches came
But
from.
do we understand the repercussions of changing and modifying right now something that's been hashed out over and over and over again? What are we gaining by just changing?
Fernando, no disrespect, but we were tasked to actually look at the project and see if there are ways to cut costs. If we can't go to the minimum code requirements, how can we actually look at doing any value engineering? We have to know what the minimum requirements are, because right now it appears that we've designed possibly the requirements that are slightly higher than that. So all I'm trying to do with this analysis is to find out what the cost impact will be. So we're effectively doing the value engineering you're talking about.
But we don't have, okay, so here's where I think that we may have gone a little bit astray with the committee and establishing and dictating things that have been discussed and debated for over a year and a half. And all of a sudden now we are questioning something that I don't even know what basis we have to question it, except the fact that it appears to be too much when this community has already reached a consensus of what the level of service should be. And beyond that, I don't even know what the repercussions are design-wise in modifying the level of service. And when I say design-wise, I don't mean the end product. I mean additional hours by engineers, additional modeling, additional modifications of plans, additional delays in permitting. What are, I mean, with all due respect to everyone here, what are we trying to achieve? Are we imagining that by
Because we
reducing?
don't have consensus in the community to build an $80 million project for just this.
Absolutely, absolutely, Michael, and I'm not talking about that. I say that my position on this has been, and it continues to be the same. We have advanced substantially in this design to a point right now that generating new engineering theory takes us back to, say, as an attorney, beginning of the case. Now we're just starting again. We can't do that. We've dedicated millions of dollars in the design. Can we modify it? Can we work in different areas? Can we reduce the cost for construction? Can we look at all that? Absolutely. But at this stage, to redefine the design, I just think that everything that we did then was a complete exercise in futility.
Mike, in all due respect, Fernando, possibly you, Mike Huda, ACOM, I don't know, Steve understood when you told us 7-inch level of service, 7-inch rainfall in 24 hours. We didn't know that maybe that would happen once in 10 years, maybe once in 20 years, maybe 2 times in 20 years. Because I can't imagine most of us say, what? We're going to go ahead and design a system that's going to happen once in 10 years and spend all that money? Does that make a lot of sense? I think most people said, no, wait a second. So maybe you understood it. So when you talk about the community knowing what we were doing, that's nonsense. If most of us on the council, who were even involved in this stuff, like Michael, myself, had no idea what we're talking about what's going to happen in 10 years or less.
So what you're saying is that basically that all the theory that was applied by professional engineers with over 20 or 25 years of experience, it's absolutely incorrect. It is wrong, and we must begin.
No, it's 100% correct. Excuse me, it's 100%. It's 100% correct. And if you have an unlimited budget and you let the one pump might turn on in 10 years, it's correct. Would it work? Of course. Why not? Be terrific. It would work. But is it necessary? Is it cost efficient? Does a cost benefit analysis make any sense? And most people would say no.
Well, we haven't done a cost benefit analysis. So
Cost benefit is $125 million for something that might happen once in 10 years. Keep your feet dry.
So we're going to then create a new baseline of design. We don't accept the 10-year, 24-hour storm event because what you're saying is that it brings less.
No, I'm saying if in fact the county's system is 5 years and 3 days, why are we going to do 7 inches in 24 hours?
I don't think, with all due respect, I don't think that that's the county adopted.
Okay, well then I misunderstood the guy.
Please
Okay.
help me out. Help me understand, staff. Please help me understand. Does the county adopt it in their stormwater criteria for the entire Miami-Dade County? Have they adopted the 5-year or the 10-year storm event? Please
Let me give it to you right here.
do we know Black and Beach?
We could get,
I can get the
That's
actual
a
county.
critical piece of information.
Just like put back of his hand. So just, he's on. He can speak to this very specifically.
Please.
Anyway, so again, we didn't know, you knew what that meant. I didn't know what it meant. Mike Bracken doesn't know what it meant. Steve, did you know what that meant?
Stuff for 30 years. That's the first time in my life that I hear it.
Steve, did you know what that meant?
Well, Tom.
Steve, did you know what that meant?
Do I know what?
That a 7-inch, 24 hour happened once in 10 years, maybe?
What is the level of service adopted, the design storm events adopted by Miami-Dade County in their manual?
Master plan.
What's the design storm that Miami-Dade County, local streets is 5-year, 24-hour event or 5-year, 72-hour?
72 hour.
So it doesn't specify specifically, but they default to 5-year, 24-hour event in the local roads. And it's a 6-inch rainfall in a 24-hour period. Right.
Okay.
So we're designing to a 10-year, 24-hour, which is a 7-inch rainstorm over 24-hour period. Yeah. Okay, that's what I thought. Okay.
Councilman,
Just stand by.
Councilmember Leonard and Councilmember Bragg, let me allow, if
Yes.
there is a modification to be made or contemplated, it should be done within the adopted stormwater, not create a new one. We should be working within those boundaries, but it's gonna warrant changes in the plans. It's gonna trigger changes in the.
If I could, just to make a clarification, Councilmember, this is a very good conversation, but I know you weren't here present last time, but what the committee had asked us to do in terms of coming up with the scope of work is just to do a modeling assessment, not to apply it to the design. I just want to make sure that Councilmember Bracken was looking for baseline modeling at the lowest possible standards.
Okay, so, Tom, can you ask Tom if they designed it already? Have they already done a model for the 5-year storm?
No, they haven't. That's why we want to run the numbers. So we just want to see what the delta difference in cost could be. That's all. So that we have a baseline.
All right.
Did you guys run a 5-year, 24-hour?
The next step.
They did a few model runs along the way, just like sanity check.
Do they have something that they can prove, that they can bring over here, so Councilmember Bragg, Councilmember Leonard, and myself can see what they have?
Well, I mean, I'd have to ask them how expensive did it have to go and remodel to be able to see if I have a 5-year, 24-hour long compared to what they've done.
You know, if we didn't do it before, I thought we had explored different options when we first started talking about.
What he's talking, I can't listen to it. What did you say, Tom? 5 years, what? He has to check with Robert, but he might have some results for the 5-year, 24-hour event, and he has to check if it's suitable to make like a direct cross comparison.
So can I just say one thing? I want to make sure that you, Councilmember London and Councilmember Bracken are speaking about the same thing. What this is right here, and then I'll let you guys speak from there, is we adjusted all of the criteria to the lowest possible criteria to come up with a baseline. So it's not just, we're not just looking at the design storm. We'd also modify it to NOAA intermediate. We'd also assume that the houses were all at BFE +3. The contributing area would only be 25 feet of the right of way. You can see it's right there in the second page. What they were trying to do is achieve a baseline.
Well, then, is it intermediate or intermediate low? Both are acceptable as old as.
No, I told you.
Right now it says no intermediate.
You told us both were acceptable.
No, an intermediate low
And intermediate.
has an 8% probability of being correct.
I mean, I'm talking
Intermediate has a
about when you
95%.
talked about the state, you came back and said the state said that intermediate high was not acceptable. And you said intermediate or
They didn't say it
intermediate
was
low
not
was
acceptable.
acceptable,
They didn't say it was not acceptable.
right?
What they said is no
Well,
intermediate,
it doesn't make that much difference. I don't care.
no intermediate low had an 8% chance that it would meet the future requirements for sea level rise. No intermediate low. No intermediate has a 95% confidence interval that it would meet.
Okay.
So they didn't say anything negative about no intermediate high. They said you can build to it if you want to, but
I thought you said they wouldn't finance intermediate high.
that's state. That's state agencies.
State, yeah, we're looking at them for money, aren't we?
That's not their standard right now.
Hmm?
That's not their standard right now.
But not, it's not their standard. Intermediate high is not their standard. Intermediate is their standard. What's their standard?
They have directed state agencies
Mm-hmm.
to build between NOAA intermediate low and NOAA intermediate.
Okay. Good enough.
That's why we
That-
chose.
that's
to
their
not
policy.
know.
That's it.
That's
There's
the
nothing
that's
more-
the range.
You want to add more into it.
No, but
That's
I'm
it.
saying that's the range.
That's it, right.
Okay.
And then you base it on your confidence interval of what you want to build to, whether it's between 8% or 95% of your confidence.
Okay.
And Steve, the question was also just to verify that the storm intensity 5-year, 24-hour storm is the minimum requirement.
Well,
That's not the storm intensity, that's just the design volume.
I can't hear who's talking.
Intensity is a different thing
Yeah, that's the design storm.
It's a design storm.
Mike, that's what they're saying, and the guy I talked to today, who supposedly designed the master plan for Dade County, tells me it's 72 hours, a 5 year.
Okay,
Not,
and I mean, this is,
24
this, got,
hours.
Ed,
Nobody
as,
does that for 72 hours. They do it by day.
Hmm?
They do it by a day. They do it by
3
24
days.
hours. No one does a study by 72
Okay.
hours.
Anyway, it is what it is.
okay,
But
yeah,
you guys
so, but
misunderstood.
if, Ed, the point I'm trying to make here was we were trying to get the minimum requirements, and Black and Beach should be able to tell, you know, we should be able to get this confirmed. This should be just a piece.
We'll confirm it tomorrow
Right,
by
so-
checking with the county. It's that easy.
Just as a matter of history, the 5-year, 24-hour design storm event was something that was by, I guess, by practice, common practice was applied for the longest time in South Florida until the, 2010, 2012, where the whole thing about sea level rise and climate change started coming up, and then they became more stringent. FDOT adopts 10-year, 24-hour for their roadways. It's, in my opinion, as long as we have a system that works accordingly, that would be a place where we could save money, but we would also need to be aware that we're designing for the future. We're not designing for today. So if we're designing for the future, we don't know how policies in the future are going to be or take shape. Today, we have some leeway to go from a 10-year to a 5-year storm event and perhaps create savings to the project. However, we would not be designing for the future. We would be designing for today. So I guess the whole objective of this is to design for the future. So, yes, go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. Did everybody hear me when I said that? I mean, I think that we need to, if we're doing something, the whole purpose of this program is for the future.
Agreed.
So I'm not disagreeing that today we have some leeway, but I also don't know what the future will dictate when we have a better understanding of how sea level rise and climate change and all these things operate.
Okay, so, but Fernando, just so for point of reference, do you have a problem? Do we have consensus on the committee to approve these criteria that we're discussing?
No, I would say on design storm, it should be what the county requires. The guys told me 72 hours, so I'm not going to agree to 24 hours until they.
So Ed, you have consensus to agree with whatever the county requires is the number we can stick in that number.
For the design storm, that's correct.
Okay, I'm good with
Yeah,
that.
and Michael,
Fernando, are you good with that?
I have always been good with adopting.
Let me just say, difference between this 5-year, 24-hour versus a 5-year, 72-hour storm is that a 5-year, 72-hour storm is going to generate 40% more water than your 5-year, 24-hour storm. So bear that in mind. Bear that in mind as you.
But if that's what the code is,
You're bringing
That's not.
more days.
Is the county code specify a 5-year, 72-hour design storm?
Guys, without the look, if we
I
want
need to
run
answer Councilmember Bracken's question, and I want to answer it.
We'll clarify.
go work it. We'll clear it. Whatever it
Michael,
is.
let me just answer your question. I have always stated this publicly in the past and in future and past committees that I want us to follow the Miami-Dade County stormwater master plan as a guide for our design storm events. I have stated this in the past and I remain consistent with that.
Perfect.
We went with a 10-year storm event because at that point we felt just like Miami Beach increased it on the local roads to 10-year storms because it is conservative and it's forward looking. Now, but I have said this before.
We didn't do anything. We just told this is what we should do. We didn't know anything except for you.
Guys, let's not re-argue this. Okay, let's not re-argue this.
We did that. We accepted it. That was all.
The purpose of this exercise is to get the minimum requirements and get the financial benefit.
Good. Let's move on.
I agree.
Good.
Let's move on. So therefore, in the next scope of work, the EAC report, run these with exactly the same specifications.
And I've talked to the engineer who did the AAC report. He'll be happy to give us a quotation to revise the thing and go through it. Because he did the original thing for EAC. They subcontracted it out to this guy, same way that ACOM hired this guy initially to do the report, do the thing we're doing today, and he's available.
Did they outline the scope of work? What is it that they would do? Or whoever, I'm still not game with having a company that is outside of the procurement
Sure.
list. I still will vote
I
no on
understand.
that.
Oh,
But
we'd have to put it
I
out for
think that
bid.
whoever does it, what would they be looking at? Do we have an idea what the scope would be?
Well, that's
This
number two.
he's
Oh,
making-
this right
goes
here.
down.
But this
That's
is
all it
not
is.
too much in
That's what we're doing
detail.
today.
I know,
That's
but
the
this
scope.
is not too much in detail.
Well, okay.
It's just an initial scope. We'd have to go into more. We just need some
Oh.
initial feedback.
And let's discuss the school, because I think, again, this is where we have the most critical issue right now. And I've read this, Ed, I don't see any problems with this at all, other than, again, the 5-year number, 24-hour, if we get that to whatever the county requirement is, that would make
Right.
sense. And I would encourage us to look at an alternative green approach.
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
I would suggest that we look at an alternative green approach. If there's a way that the other gentleman can resurface the road around the school, create the cistern that they're discussing, and be able to put that into an injection well system, that may be the best of all worlds.
Listen, I certainly want to explore everything we can. So if that can help us, then let's do it. I mean, we'd be foolish not to, if it's the best way of going. Again,
getting
cost
big,
involved. And we have to see, is that cost going to be prohibitive? Because obviously I got a feeling it's very expensive when they're dancing around and don't want to give me some multiples.
I think you're talking to I think you're talking to an engineer who's not comfortable with throwing numbers out at you. Okay.
No, he knows the numbers.
No,
He knows the numbers.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying not to do it. I'm just saying we
It
got to
doesn't
look
hurt.
at it.
It doesn't hurt to ask for a proposal. It doesn't hurt to ask. It won't hurt to ask for a proposal.
I'm all for it, Mike, 100%. So the only thing I want to change on tab 2, if it's okay with Fernando and you, is go to 2050 instead of 2040. You see, we're
That's
doing
fine.
there to be consistent with tab 1. I
Agreed.
think we'll.
Yeah, I thought we discussed that already, but yes, agreed.
No.
And that would also change on page 3, Steve, as well.
We got it. Now, I do want to
Same
I
thing
do
there.
want to make sure that, we understand that, we start talking about alternative green approaches and we start having 2 different alternatives on this assessment. It's going to be a combination of time and money. And so, and it's also going to be a much more complex scope than we've written right now.
I got a suggestion. Why don't we go forward with what we have here? Let them come back with stuff. Let whoever's going to do this do it, and then show that to our, what do we call, the pervious people, for lack of a better word, and see how they think that they can modify it and make it better by using what they would add to the system. And then, and also the cost involved. So we then know if it's a cost benefit relationship we want to go forward with. So in other words, go ahead, do this the way we're talking about, get it done, then come back, and then say, hey, guys, Walter and Patrick, here's the thing. Can you make this better? Does it work? How can you
When
do
you're
it?
talking, can you make what better? This one right here?
When it comes back, yeah, the guy comes back and says, okay, I need to do
Talk
this.
about this, not the current plan.
No,
Talk
but
about
if you come back here, the guy comes back and says this, this, and this. And Walter says, yeah, but if you want to do this, we could substitute this, and this would take this many CFS or whatever,
I think the way.
and it would cost this much
the-
money.
I think the only way we could get to local, we'll call it local, that's his company, is to do it through an RFQ, or he would have to sub with whomever we give this project to.
Well, I would first get the thing done. Let waste a lot of time, get it done, see what we have.
Okay.
then you can do RFQs, RFPs, RFCs, whatever kind of RF you like, okay? And then,
You want transparency till you want it
I
quick.
mean, I don't know what you call it, so whatever you call it, RFQ, P, C, whatever.
Depends on what you're asking for.
Whatever kind of R you want, okay?
Come on, you
But I mean,
guys.
my point is do this first.
Steve, I was thinking that there might be a possibility to run the scope of work and then have these guys look at the response and see if there's a way to add green that may actually value engineer the thing down on price. Okay.
So
It does-
we can add a couple phrases in tab 3, the KK81. We can do where we can, look at alternative considerations, taking in consideration green alternatives. If you like to add us a couple words into that scope, we can do that.
I think that would be great. We get consensus.
And get two different people, but then you're getting two different people involved, really.
No,
Because the guys who do the green stuff, they probably wouldn't do the other stuff, would they?
no, there are firms that do both, or they can sub. There are people who have the
I
ability.
mean, why do we have to sub? Why don't we just deal directly with people rather than hire somebody and they sub it? Like we hired EAC, they then hired this guy to do the work. We hire different people. Let's hire people directly so we control them better than what we're doing.
I'm sorry, I have to ask a question. Why are we so adamant to hire EAC?
What?
Why are we so adamant in hiring EAC?
Not that we don't want to hire EAC.
Yeah, keep on bringing up EAC.
No, EAC, that's who, EAC hired
Giorgio.
somebody else to do this plan, okay? They
Mhm.
didn't do the EAC plan. They're road engineers. But we hired them for storm sewer engineers. Then they in turn subcontracted it.
And we want to bring them back. What do we want to
No,
bring?
bring that guy who they hired.
But what's the guy that they hired going to do except that any other engineering firm can do?
He's gonna take his original data and rerun the model. Because he's
But
already
they have
done
a
the model.
different, have we, I'm sorry, pardon me. Have we verified if the model that was done in 2015 is the same thing that AECOM is applying? Because we're not going to start a model from zero, are we?
This is the scope of work to determine if that model made sense and bring it forward to 2025. That's what the scope of work is.
Yeah, but,
Anyway.
okay, so what a technical question here. What is AECOM using for a model? SWIM? ICPR. So what is this guy, this person, this InfoSwim?
Understand, no.
How's he going to ground truth? Okay, but any modeler.
No groundwater modeling is done relative to anything that EAC had previously done. They just did an InfoSwim model exercise.
Yeah, was it a 1D, 2D? I can't, it was pretty
No, well, InfoSwim
rudimentary,
just
yeah.
is 1D.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, in order to understand the effects of injection well solutions
Hmm.
and implementation, you essentially have to do a groundwater model. And
Mhm.
it's clear in the report that groundwater modeling would have to be done in order to design an injection well system. So they just were looking at the hydraulics using InfoSwim. And that's it.
Right, that's what they will, that's what that model will do.
Yeah.
So then we would have to, so help
So
me
in order-
understand.
So say they propose, okay, 6 injection wells.
Mm-hmm,
Okay, just volumetrically, from a hydraulics point of view, you would need 6 injection wells.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that they have the groundwater modeling to pair and design those injection wells to understand how much of an effect in an interplay there is between the volume of water that they're trying to inject and what the effect's going to be on the groundwater table. So
right.
all of that, so groundwater modeling would have to be done in order to then design whatever injection well system
Yes,
is being
you need a
requested,
hydrogeo for
recommended.
that one. You're gonna need a hydrogeo for that
Yeah.
one to do that
So-
modeling
so
and it's, I'm not sure
really
what.
I'm not really sure what the redo of the hydraulic modeling is gonna provide.
Right.
I'm confused by what is trying to be accomplished.
Okay, so let me break this down first, in my mind, at least in my mind. We've got already an ICPR. AECOM has used ICPR. Let's just talk about surface water modeling at this point, runoff. AECOM has done ICPR, EAC did interconnected pond routing.
What's it called?
Interconnected pond routing. Now it's called Streamline Technologies. It's a modeling that was done when I first got out of college. So
Last year.
that old. So, but EAC used InfoSwim 1D, 2D, which is a standard public access program. Anybody can, it can be used. It's public access, I believe. So, but to analyze the wells, now we got into other issues, other type of dynamics, other type of modeling, RC, whatever, maybe we got to do a groundwater model.
If you wanted to take EAC's recommendations from 2015.
Right.
You wanted to like actually turn that into design me these recommendations so that I can actually then build it.
Uh-huh.
You would have to do groundwater model in order to understand how to design that well system. Because you need to be able to.
Yes, of course. Yeah,
What
yeah,
the effects are gonna be.
But it wouldn't be, but it would not
Well-
be a village-wide groundwater model. It would be strategic
Well,
and it
but
would be,
that turns into a whole other modeling question. It's like, what's the model domain?
well, right now,
You make the
the,
model domain zone one, or you make the model
Let me-
domain.
I gotta work this on, I'm sorry, I just have to work this on my head. So you got a surface water model that has developed a matrix of pipelines that are meant to discharge this pipe. Now, we're talking about doing wells. And now we have to model that, but we have to model it separately and discreetly because it's going to be certain locations where we need to compensate for additional water and therefore reduce the cost of the price of the pipes. That means that you have to integrate modeling with design between two firms. That's what it's feeling like.
Yeah.
That's what it's feeling like.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you a dumb question from non-engineer, non-hydrologist, non-anybody. We have a system right now that's pipes and shallow gravity wells, not injection wells. And the ACOM tells us that it has capacity of 302 cubic feet per second. And basically, once we go ahead and recalculate if possible, 25 feet from the street, whatever we're gonna do, and come up, we're gonna say, now we're gonna have in a rainfall of 72 hours or 24 hours, X amount of rain. We will then know the net difference between that. At that point in time, we're gonna have X amount of water that has to be disposed of. Now, if that water can be disposed of reasonably with shallow injection wells, and if we know that a shallow injection well, depending on what's an 8-foot head maximum or something like that, with a 24-inch diameter does X amount, was it 1,500 gallons an hour or 1,000 gallons a minute, not an hour? Why do we have all this complicated modeling? If that
don't. This-
doesn't work, why do we have to do all that stuff?
Ed, this is a math exercise. I mean, all we need to know is how is from the EEC model, how much water is going to be produced on that model. And then we know how many pumps that we potentially
I'm
would
agreeing with
need.
you.
Yeah.
I'm agreeing with you, Mike. I agree
Yeah.
with you 100%. I understand why they're doing all this other stuff.
Because we don't need to get to that. What we're going to find out is it potentially is that this system may or may not work, which.
Exactly. Okay, we agree.
Okay.
I'm saying he and I agree, maybe you don't.
I
Two of us agree. You're the guy who knows everything. We know nothing.
This is, I think this is designing on the fly. I just think that we hired professionals. I understand the sentiment of the cost. I understand that we're all very uncomfortable with the price that we're talking about, but I think we're taking, in my opinion, I mean, especially after witnessing the work and voting for additional costs to put on this project on design and go on model after model and spending over $400,000 in modeling. Now we're going to engage in further modeling because for some unknown reason, we cannot be comfortable with the design and nobody, and I'm going to exclude myself out of this one because I got 30 years experience in this and this time I am going to put it on the table. Nobody except myself has any idea what we're talking about here as it relates to design. And my apologies for saying that, but it's time to say it. It's time to say it. I don't go out there and I don't question an attorney. I don't go out there and I question a doctor. I don't go out there and I question a policeman.
Fernando, we're not
Questioning. Michael, excuse me. You can speak.
but I have the floor right
Finish.
now.
I don't mean to
And I'm going
interrupt. Okay.
I'm going to speak my mind because this thing, in my opinion, has been an accumulation of misinformation on top of the other, feeding on the fear that we're spending a tremendous amount of money. I have provided a sound, pragmatic solution, which is to do value engineering. And it seems like this committee, it wants to take this design back to zero. And this is going to cost additional money to the taxpayers. And I think that we're doing a complete disservice to this community and not trusting the professionals that we're putting in. Otherwise, let's just go sit down, lay a bunch of plans and design it ourselves, and let's see what we can come up with.
Okay.
I just think it's a complete disrespect to the industry, a complete disrespect to the people that have dedicated a year and a half to do this work. And now we're questioning it again, and we're going to spend money again in modeling something that we don't even know because we're going on a field. We're not even going on actual technical and mathematical thoughts. I don't know what to say. I'm sorry. I don't mean to get like this, but it's just enough is enough.
It's fine. You have an opinion. You're allowed to share your opinion. I just
Thank
want to remind you what the mayor asked us to do. The mayor asked us to look at this issue, try to figure out if there's a potential more cost-effective way to look at this, but without data points and going to the base requirements, we can't make any decisions about whether we can VE anything, because all we're going to be doing.
Not.
Go ahead. Apologies, go ahead.
Fernando, all we would be doing, look, I don't want to argue with you, I'm highly uncomfortable trying to do this over the speaker because it's just doesn't work well. But I'm looking to try to get this moving because we have a fiduciary responsibility to actually go through the math exercise here. And if we're spending if we spend $250,000 to confirm that what we actually have is good stuff from a third party, what's the problem with that?
Is that it? Okay.
We're talking about
This is standard
$80 to
physics.
$90
This
million
is
project.
science. This is science. This is physics. Water flows downhill. There's nothing really, any modifications that we're going to see except by just applying the same mathematical, the same physical concepts. An engineer that designs it's going to come up with the same results. I just don't see the necessity to continue to spend money. Every time somebody questions this, we go back and we throw hundreds of thousands of dollars to get a certain group comfortable about this process. Let's just accept this is science. This is physics. This is an applied science in South Florida, which has been proven over and over and over again and applied over and over and over again. What are we questioning? What are we questioning? That we just don't feel good about the price? Yes, stormwater is very expensive. Guess what? It's very expensive. It's not cheap. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to go now and get staff and everybody again to redesign this entire thing just because we're going on a feel that we didn't check all the data points. I'm sorry. I don't know anybody here that has done a drainage design, and please tell me what data points we would be checking. I have done plenty of drainage design, and I know exactly what we're doing here, and it's perfectly fine. And I'm very comfortable with what is being done. I'm just not comfortable with the price, that's all. But I think there were some ways of cutting it, not just going into engineering theory.
You say you don't check policemen or lawyers or doctors.
No, I don't.
Well, you know what? I check engineers when they tell me water doesn't go into the ground, when they tell me 100% of the rainwater has to be pumped. You know, I'm a moron, but I have two eyes. I've been around for 85 years, and I see water goes into the ground. I see people designing things with pervious soils. I can let you talk. Let me finish. Pervious everything. And then tell me, well, yeah, but the rain's going to come, the tide's going to come, and so on and so forth. That's great, but I don't believe it.
Okay. Well, so if you don't believe it and you question the engineering,
Gentlemen, this conversation's not going
Too
anywhere.
old. They wouldn't take me to
get your
college.
pee, come back, and then we can talk about it.
Guys, this conversation's not going anywhere.
This is not helping.
Excuse me,
Listen, you love AECOM, you work for AECOM, you sold us an AECOM, you represented AECOM, then you left AECOM, and now you're on the board saying we should listen to AECOM.
That's okay.
I'm sick and tired of this shit.
All right, listen, guys. Hey,
Ed,
Fernando. Hey, guys, let's stop, please. Okay. We're discussing the scope of work for the school. Do we have any more comments?
No, just 2050, same thing, consistent.
Anything else that anybody else would like to cover this evening?
Any questions in the audience?
So council member, I just want to,
One here,
if you all do decide to go this way,
John Festa.
okay.
Sorry, Steve.
I really, really didn't plan on speaking tonight, just listening, but the challenge that you have is what cost are you going to bear to build what system in this community? And I'm hearing from at least the members of this committee that the cost is way too high. It's not going to go down. You can value engineer it, but you have to look at the big picture. What are you trying to accomplish? Are you trying to accomplish an immediate solution to an immediate problem around the school area and maybe some other neighborhoods? Then you should concentrate on that. And if you need to run different models that will help you make a decision, whether it be value engineering or whether it be the green solution, which was intriguing, maybe a combination of both. That is I think the challenge that you have right now is to kind of back off from what everybody agrees, I think, on the council is an uncomfortable price that may be going up. And you're not going to reduce that cost by any other means than reducing the scope of the work and making a decision that you can't afford the long-term solution right now. And maybe as technology changes, and we heard a technology change tonight, you might be able to solve the longer-term problem when it becomes a problem, but satisfy the short-term problem that we know exists. And I think that's the whole purpose of this committee, was to try to get to that point. And maybe the wording wasn't done right, and the understanding of what people were doing or not doing based upon previous committees. But I think the track that you're going on, of at least from 2 members of the committee, to focus on the short-term solution, see if a longer-term solution may make sense from a 15-year study, and maybe do them parallel. But the most important thing for this community right now is the short-term solution at a reasonable cost. And everything else should be shelved. Maybe there is a reason to finish the study that's currently underway so that you can get the permits and get into the funding source and reduce the scope, because that was mentioned at the last meeting. That may make sense. But concentrate on the real problem now. You're not going to be able to afford the long-term solution now.
And may I just say something? You said something. I'm completely on the same page as you are. I think that we should do the short-term solution, but with one caveat. We should do the short-term solution looking into the future. When I say value engineering, I'm saying, and I even express this to staff, is it necessary for us to have all these different connectors and catch basins? Can we use surface flow, because water finds its way downhill, to get to Heather Drive, say, where the main trunk line is? I think we would be reducing a significant amount of structures and pipes, and also work on the installation, see if we can reduce that. I think we could reduce some of the cost, because we would be doing the bare minimum, but the bare minimum looking towards the future, not just putting in a pipe that just helps us for now. That's my only difference in between what you're saying, but we're pretty much on the same page.
No, but I understand that. But you have a plan for the future that exists now. Through technology changes, it may be different in the future. It may cost the same in the future. Well, everything's going to cost more in the future, but the dollar and inflation and other things are going to, let's not get into the economical issue, because I think the real issue right now is to look at what faces you in the community and solve that now. And if you can solve it in a cheaper way without having to design it for the current long-term solution, that's a decision you'll have to make. And I understand where you're coming from. I think you want to say, why waste money in doing something completely different when it doesn't feed into the master plan that's being designed right now, but that master plan can change. And the other thing I want to mention here, and it's not related, but it's related to what Ed said about pervious material, pervious surfaces and impervious surfaces, and how much homes put onto the roads. Whatever the council adopted in 2022 is a major change in how you calculate the impact that a home has. And I can tell you that new homes built since Hurricane Andrew were required to keep water on their property and have minimal amount of water going into the streets, okay? So there's two parts to this point. The first part is Ed has mentioned that that's not considered in the current modeling, and maybe it doesn't matter, the delta doesn't matter, but you should consider it. You should have an accurate idea of how much water any given home puts into the street for the model. The second thing is when you do a cost analysis of how much each home is paying, that should be taken into account as well. It may not make a big difference in individual homes, but it's the right way to do things. If you built a home in 1996 where you elevated your backyard 4 feet and elevated your front yard 2 feet and have only one area of roof going on your driveway, that's not taken into account. You're considered by your structure as a contribution to how much you're going to pay into the system. If you do an analysis of what each home does, then it may or may not affect the model, but it's a fair way of assessing people. But I think Ed is right. You do need to consider these things. And when you run models, you're doing just changing a parameter. What is the effect of the parameter on that model? So you're tweaking things. And as an engineer, you know about the effective impervious fraction. That's a significant difference from what is being designed right now. There's no, the effective impervious fraction takes into account how much water you retain on your property.
Right, but I guess so I understand what you're saying, and I want to understand. Are we suggesting that each homeowner take care of their own drainage within their property?
They're doing it now under new building code.
Under the new building code?
Yes,
not
and
the existing?
in 1996, after Andrew.
92, it's Andrew.
Huh?
Andrew's 92.
92, but when I built my home in 96,
Oh, okay, I'm
after
sorry.
Andrew, the building code, the South Florida building code in Miami-Dade required, and the new village code, which we enacted as when I was on the council, required a certain amount of permeable material and also required you retain the water on your property and not spill it into your neighbor's property.
Yes, that's the term.
And people have gutters and people have elevated homes and they divert water under their home.
I'm not sure if homes are already grandfathered in, would they be required? Are you suggesting that they do that as well? I mean, homes that are already grandfathered, homes that are already.
You're talking about elevated homes.
Yeah, elevated.
Elevated homes retain most of the water on their property.
Okay.
It's a requirement of the building code. In any event, that should be taken into account when you're doing your modeling. Maybe it doesn't make a big difference, but it should also be taken into account when you start changing things.
John, just for the record, we are changing that requirement. We went from 100 feet in to 25 feet in the model.
Okay.
So,
But I just wanted to, that's what you mentioned at the last 2 meetings, and
correct.
you weren't there at that time, but that's one of the parameters, trying to.
One of the things you're basically saying is that by 2050, there should be probably very few Mackles left at the present rate.
Yeah.
At which point, all new homes, like, I don't know when we just changed it, the ground level will be 8.5 feet because we have a code. This has to be minimum, can't be more than 2.5 feet below BFE. BFE is 11, so that brings it down to 8.5. Now I know you're going to be able to absorb some water in there, aren't you?
No, but you're bringing up, I mean, that's a line of discussion right there. That's a valuable line of discussion. I believe that if we're designing for the future, we should also take into consideration the elevation of future
That's what I'm
homes.
saying.
Are we doing that in the current design?
No,
Well, then that is something that I think it's a very valid point, because if we're designing for the future, we should take that into consideration.
they've said that basically, absorption because the ground level is
Well,
coming up.
Just
the water level.
for you to know, council member, if you look back to the baseline stormwater modeling, we are making assumption that all homes are built at BFE +3
Okay. Well, then we're taking
for that
Something
baseline.
going forward, yeah, but we haven't. They
Well,
come
but
to do that.
but that will dictate the
They come to
design.
do that. They're saying, there's no, you can't do it because right now they're looking at what we have today. We're looking for the future.
Guys,
We gotta do
anything
the
else?
vote to put this on mic and get it moving.
Anything else?
Anybody else want to speak? I don't see anybody raising their hands. Joe's
Yeah.
ready to fall asleep.
Steve,
Nancy
you
wants
want to say something final?
No, I'm just was gonna ask you, so what are the next steps? So, are you all gonna do a report out to the council in May 13th? Or do you want me to start, I mean, obviously we'll clean up these scopes, make sure they're ready to go. But do you want us to start identifying potential firms to do this work so that we can be ready to move on?
I think we should, and I think we should be prepared to take a packet to the council for approval.
Okay. Are you talking a packet with proposals back from firms?
What's today's date? You mean, we should be able to get some prices by then.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yes,
Proposals back from firms.
that's the goal, Steve.
Okay, and
Okay, all right. And so I do want to ask the question, and I want us to think about this logically. For the first scope of work, the baseline stormwater modeling, should we use the firm that is, or we've already spent a lot of money to do the modeling on, or should we use someone else?
I think we have to get other prices besides ACOM. I mean, ACOM didn't tell us what we're doing in the beginning, we're the position we are because they are. I mean, I feel, I don't want to see taken, I would say misled. I can't say that either. It's my fault, but I went ahead and believed that that was a reasonable thing, that something would happen. I didn't know it was going to happen, what we designed for. So and let's face it, I would have screamed, and most people would have screamed, we're talking about designing something for once in 10 years. So I just don't have anything to do with them. at this point.
Then I'll ask the question.
That's my personal
Are you
opinion.
willing to pay $1.5 million for this job?
What?
Are you willing to pay about $1.5 million
what?
for what we're asking them to do?
Well, no, I'm not going to pay that at all.
Because they're gonna have to do an
Well, you know what?
entire
Why don't we just put it out? and
village-wide
see-
drainage
Why don't
assessment.
we put it out and see what comes back, okay?
well,
Ed?
I think that there's a bigger discussion in council right now, because I think that the fact that we're not only talking additional costs, we're talking also we're gonna get to the point that ACOM's contract ends.
So what?
And no, and can I finish, please? Maybe more
I'm
in your line
sorry.
of thinking than you actually think. So, are we revisiting, we should revisit our contract, I think, to see if we're going in this direction. And if we're gonna move into a reevaluation of the design, I don't see the value of keeping ACOM. I just don't.
It's not our purview, guys.
And I think that's a council discussion, because it's silly to keep them, the plans are gonna be shelved. And what are we gonna do? We're gonna tell them, come back?
We're gonna
I
finish
just
it.
don't know. I think that's a council discussion, and I'm happy to put it on the table. In fact, I love to put it on the table. If we need to revisit that, let's revisit ACOM, let's revisit the whole contract, and let's make council comfortable for once and for all with this issue.
But we are gonna have to make a decision in May, because their contract runs out in June. So we are going to bring an item to the table to have that discussion.
We need to have that discussion, because if we're moving in the direction of reevaluating the design and looking at different alternatives, I am not going to continue with ACOM. It doesn't make any sense to continue with an engineering firm that has done work if we're going to reevaluate it, and I want council to feel comfortable.
That's what I'm saying.
See,
but-
I'm on your page. I have a problem with that. I don't have a problem. I just want to be done right. Okay? I want it to be done right. And if we need to do it that way, we'll just have to do it that way. But
Steve, we had a question in the last council meeting, what the balance of payment was for that, what was owed to ACOM to complete to 100%. What's the delta now owed to them from their contract value?
It's minimal. I mean, they're still working towards 100%, and it's probably fully committed or closely committed, encumbered for them to do the work?
So guys, for all intents and purposes.
So we're not gonna, if you're saying not keeping AECom from going, we're not gonna save them any money on that. It's just a decision as to whether we go with another design firm.
Okay, so just for purposes of conversation, I want you to hear this. These guys are nationally recognized engineers, okay? Having them run the model of the base parameters is going to cost us very little because they wrote the model. Now, Ed, I completely understand how you're frustrated by these guys, okay? And feel not that they've done something maybe possibly a disservice, but to spend $1.5 million, as Steve is suggesting, possibly to have the whole project remodeled doesn't make a lot of sense.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Okay.
Couldn't agree with you more.
I think it warrants.
So gentlemen, can we agree that Steve can float this to AECom, and then we can also float it to somebody else?
They can give us a price, sure, why not?
Okay. Steve,
Yeah.
I think that works for you, right?
We can do it. We'll do it to AECom, and we'll also do it to another firm on our pool.
Okay. All right. Anything else, guys? Steve?
Nope, I've got my guidance.
Yeah,
there will be
what
an
I'd like to
item.
do is submit this to, I'll give you the guy's name, the guy who did the EAC model, who did the ACOM thing, and let him see if he says he's interested in bidding on this thing.
Okay, he can put in any proposal he wants, but in order to get the
I
contract,
understand
he
what
has to work
Chad-
for one of
Chad,
our
they're gonna
existing
Get on our
contractors.
list, what we have to do to get him on the list.
He would have to compete under RFQ 4 years ago.
I mean, wouldn't you want to use a guy who's done all this stuff or even not?
Council member, I want you to understand how the procurement process
I
works. We
understand
went out
that.
for competitive bid
I
4 years
understand all
ago,
that.
and we have 5 or 6 firms that can do this, that they became our
You
stormwater
didn't get a
engineers.
competitive bid, you got qualified bidders. They don't.
Competitive to become qualified.
Okay, but you didn't get.
Our procurement
get
law,
bidders, you get
state law,
qualified people.
county law, and our charter states that we can only pick people off of competitively bid contracts.
And so in other words, ACOM said, we're gonna charge 6,300,000, and somebody said they're gonna charge 8 million? I don't think so. You sat down and negotiated with them.
What we did is
You
we
didn't.
did an RFQ.
You
and they
didn't
gave-
get better to do with anybody.
We did not. Sure, we did. We did an RFQ. They came back.
Yeah.
They said they could do it. They were responsive,
Mhm.
and they gave us a list of their costs,
Yeah.
time, and materials.
Right. So they didn't give you a cost. They gave you, we charge so much an hour for this and this,
Yes.
you broke it all down.
And then we
So
do work orders.
They
off
didn't
that.
competitive anything because you didn't know exactly how many units of X and Y you're gonna use. And obviously it was about $800,000 more when it was done than when they said it was gonna be, correct?
I'm not sure what you're talking about.
No, I
but
think it came out to
I'm
the
just
6
telling you. I'm just telling you what procurement law.
All
tells
I'm
us we can
saying
do.
to you is that,
And Giorgio can do a proposal if we want, but we cannot pick him unless we do a competitive bid with him.
fine. And I'm saying we have, well, fine, I'm gonna talk to Chad and see what we have to do, okay?
Okay.
Yeah, we can get opinions.
It'd be foolish.
Unless it's under
not to-
$35,000, and then we can choose it.
Yeah,
But
that's-
I don't think anything we're doing here is under $35,000.
Okay.
Steve, I think that we're talking about a big figure here. That's. the
Talking a
way
very
I'm
large
looking at it.
figure.
So if, again, I go back to it. I mean, I'm looking at the scope and I would charge a pretty big figure for this.
So why
because
don't we
it's doable.
change the scope to make it
So-
reasonable, get the answers we need?
So let me just finish this. So I think we need to look at the future. If the sentiment of council is to move in a different direction or to reevaluate or to reassess, and as the nice gentleman just came over and spoke about relooking at doing what we need to do now, then I don't feel that continuing with ACOM makes sense, in my opinion. That's just my humble opinion, if we're going to invest that much money. Because if we're not, then that's fine. But if we do, then I think we need to have a serious discussion about revisiting this design. That's my take, but council will make that decision eventually.
All right, anything
But
else, gentlemen?
that's where I'm
We're gonna
going with this.
Ed, anything else? One last time?
No,
Fernando,
No, I'm good, thank you.
Steve?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're closed. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike. Feel better.